Hello! In this example, I will be showing how to use the ODBC connection and transfer data to a table view and also an array of internal tag, but that could be also PLC tags in that case. So ODBC driver has been there since the beginning for unified runtime systems, and more recently on since V18 for the unified config panels. It's available for us to use. So this is the landing page of the application. I will be showing later on what are the meaning of all of those IO fields. But how to use that is simply using either one of the two buttons on the top. So the second one is just the documentation one with the release note patch note that I've made, and also the video you're listening at will be inside the user file inside the project folder. So if we open the ODBC pop-up, very simple to use. We only need to at first specify the SQL server or SQL endpoint, user and password, and that's going to build our connection string behind. I have here on the network a SQLEXPRESS with a DB and some tables inside of it to make some tests. So what I can do is use my endpoint IP. I could also have used the name, but in that case I will use the IP. So DB user. So that should build my my connection string, as I said. So this is Win10 Siemens is basically this IP is that virtual machine here, and the server, the SQL server, is SQLEXPRESS for the name. DB user and also the password, I have made sure that remote access is enabled in the security settings of my SQLDB. So from now, I can list the available DB. As I can see, I can have my system databases like masters and model, but I also have my test DB, which we can see here, which is a normal database. I could create a new one in here. Let's call it new DB, but that's not mandatory. We could have used already test DB, but just to show, we can use create DB and then list again, and we can see that in the list we have now the new DB. When we select one from the list in here, we know that the selected DB is the one selected on the left. So in that case, I'm going to be working more with the test DB one. I can also delete DB, so by selecting the one I want and just deleting, and then list again. That should be removing from the server. But not from the list, unfortunately. So yeah, once it's selected, we can either list the available tables inside the database that is selected. So in that case, that's going to list tables inside testDB. If I can see here, I have a couple of tables here: table 1, table 2, table test, table authors, books, and trigger BL. So I can list that. And of course, I can have everything listed here. So I can select either one of those. And as you can see, at the same time as I click, my SQL Table View is adapting the column based on the choice of your table. So it already pre-format the table viewer for the query to be used afterwards. Again, we can also create a table here. So it's test table, for example. We can create the table and then list again. So now we have the test table here. Table test. So Test table. Oh yeah, so I just forgot something in here. So if I want to create a new table, I have to specify the columns. So I could specify name as a varchar 50, for example, with an age of int again, and it's an email of varchar 100. So I need to specify this in order to be able to create the table. So once I've done that, I should get a new table now. So I have test table here, and I've created 3 columns: names, age, and email. So you can see that my table adjusts automatically. So the index one on the far left is the manual added column that will serve later on to know what index in our tag arrays are the entries at. So stay tuned for that. That's later on. So, for example, if we want to see what's inside table 1, I can select table 1. So selected table is 1. Selected DB is test DB. So my query is going to be built on those parameters. Here I can select select, and I could query everything that is inside that table. So I only have 2 entries now in here. So it shows an index 0 and index 1. So as I said earlier, this index is to represent what index of the array of the tag inside my WinCC applications, all of those are assigned at. So basically, my column 1, which is ID index 0, this is going to be the value of that tag. And for column 2, here DOM is going to be column 2 index 0. So if we go to the other screen behind, you can see that I've assigned the tags. So column 1, the index 0 is that value, column 2 is that value at index 0, etc. So if I go inside Portal, just quickly, so this is just simple arrays of strings. So for now, everything is converted to strings, but for data efficiency and such, that could be adjusted accordingly if you're of any needs. But basically, column 1 is 0, and here is that one in here. It's also possible to insert some data if you know how to put the query. So if I'm not mistaken, I need to specify the columns at first. So I should specify ID, the name, the value, and then say these values, then the value. So I will just use that in here and put a B instead of an A at the end. Then Bob, the value of 3, for example. I think Bob has to be in quotes because it's a string. And if I execute the query, hopefully I would get some result in here. So and I go here, I select, I can show back again every result. And now I have a new entry named Bob with a value of 3 and an ID of the same as the first entry here, but with a B at the end. And I know that's going to be in the index 2 of my internal tag, so it's here. Right, so I did also some tests for many queries. So for example, in that table author, I have 10,000 entries. So I could read, I don't know, let's say the top 500 entries, and from what I can see, it's going quite fast. So I already received the 500 result, just 1 second or so. So I have 500 entries by 3 columns, so 1.5 thousand entries or data. And you can see here, so my data has been mapped to all of my tags, basically. Of course, all of those mechanisms shown here can be automated very easily. It's just a matter of breaking down the steps one by one and showing how we can interact with endpoints, databases, tables, and then queries. Also how to map the data to be able to view it, and also mapping what we see inside real tags. And by real tags, what I mean is this is based on the array of object model of JavaScript, but what we see behind is a real array of tags. So those tags could be linked to a PLC at the end of the day. So what I also tried is creating a DB in Azure SQL in the cloud. So what is good with Azure is that you get the $200 US credit when you first create an account, and the only thing you have to do is to create an SQL server. So I've named Siemens, and just make sure that in your security you will allow external connections. And what I found out is that the firewall rules are based on the IP to be able to send connection requests to the database. And so this is a bad idea. What I did here is just for demo purposes. This is not really secure. I allow every IP to send connection requests to the database. So this is the server, so the endpoint. So inside the endpoint, I have an SQL database named TestDB, and what we can see here is that I have already a table created inside that TestDB. What is also good with that view here is on the left panel you have connection strings, and inside connection strings you have a tab named ODBC, and it gives you the path or the ODBC connection string. So the only thing we have to be careful about is in here is to use driver 17 instead of 18, because if you take a look at your data source, the driver we have is ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server, not 18. But again, in my example, the only thing we need is the user password and the endpoint connection, so the URL in our case. So only this in here. So if I close the view and I reopen it, it should reset my view a little bit. So I can put my URL from my Azure database, for example DB user, and that's my password. I can list available DB. So I have TestDB, a master which is a system, a new DB that I just created just like the one before. For now we'll use the TestDB, and I can list tables again inside the cloud. Then I have one table, table 1. It adjusts my columns automatically, and I can select everything in that table, for example. So as you can see, I have a couple of entries here, and that's going to be mapped again to internal tags, or tags mapped to PLC, but with all of those data. So currently the example works with for the mapping to the tags, to the WinCC tags, it works with three columns, but it could be extended to whatever needs we want, right? It's just a matter of creating new internal tags and telling the script in behind to assign the columns to the tag. I will show you that in a second. So very cool for this. What I also made sure in that example is it works on unified convert panels too. So this is a VNC connection to a unified panel, running V18 firmware. So system property, so you can see that I have firmware version 18 and that's basically the exact same application. So I made sure it was compatible for both systems, and that's pretty nice that we are able to connect to a cloud database or a LAN database if you want, but in that case right now it's going to be a cloud database from a panel, from a unified panel, an HMI, not PC system. Just oh, I think yeah, I just need to make sure my DHCP internet connection is just do that and make sure I have a DHCP request. Okay, that should be better. Okay, so I can read the exact same thing as I've read in the PC system. So testdb, for example, checking the table and select everything from that table. For example, here I will execute the query, and I have a very nice table that I can play with inside the unified panel. And what we can see too is that the tags are also mapped on the unified panels. So that could be going inside a PLC at the end of the day. And all of that script made step by step could also be mapped to tags that are linked to the PLC. So basically the PLC could do requests based on that system. So that's pretty nice. What I want to show also now, if I did not mention it, this table view is not the default WinCC object. This is a custom web control. It comes from the application example available on the support website called WinCC Unified Custom Web Controls. And the one I've used is the table custom web control, this one in here. So this is a custom you can use in your engineering, and then you can display some data inside of it. So basically when you have set it up, you have this, for example in my case it's here, it's called my table custom web control. And to have this in here, what you have downloaded before will be will have to be placed inside your project user file folders, then custom controls, and then you can put some custom web controls in here, and then they will display in my controls. So that's like a project based approach, but you also can have a TI portal approach where for every project you have certain web controls. You have to put the custom web controls into your TI portal directory installation instead of the project directory. But yeah. Just a quick note on what I've used. But other than this, everything else is by default available for both WinCC Unified PC runtime and Unified panels. So, of course, all of the scripts I will be showing can be optimized. There's a lot of duplicates, functions, and stuff like that. Of course, that could be betterly done, but I think it's a good start. The most important one we need to be looking at is the exec query button. So the exec query button triggers a big function, and that's where basically at first that we build our query. So the query will be firstly, depending on the menu on the left or the drop-down list. If the drop-down list is 0, then we show select. Case is 1, it's insert, and then it builds the query out of that. So basically, if it's a select, we then say select, then space, then the query argument. The query argument is the IO field right here. this one here. Then we say from the selected table. So that's the variable that returns the table we have selected. So this here. Same for the insert into, just slightly different because the query statement is different. So we have to build it in a different way. So what is also important to see is this connection string. So the connection string, it depends on the endpoint. So this is the IO field where we put the URL or the IP to the server. Then for some we have this argument, which is the database selected DB. But for the list of the database, we don't have this. But this will be telling in our connection string that we will be using, for example, testDB. Then we can work with the table. But we don't have this for listing the DB. I will show you. But yeah, in that case, now we have it. And then the user ID, so the user and the password. After this, this is just receiving the rows and the elements in the rows from the DB, and we push everything we receive into an array called array value. So this is an internal value that has been defined at the top in here. So we push what we receive in an object manner to this value, to this array value. Then once we have pushed all of that value here, we now have an array with all the value we have queried from the DB. And we execute the table data function to be able to map the received value in array value to our SQL table viewer and also to the internal tag. So once we have done this function, we then close the connection of the ODBC. And also if it does not work, so if the try here does not work, we catch the error and you have the traces. This is a standard snippet, by the way. So if you open any other script engine area, then you have a snippet called database access and select statement, for example. So this is already there for you. So if you don't want to mess with breaking down steps and having to enter manually into IO fields your user and passwords, for example, if you just want to put static value, you can use that example snippet and just put whatever driver you want to use in here. Also, the server is going to be your endpoint, and the database, for example, if you already know what the database you want to communicate with, and you could add user password like I did. Also, the query now is here. Basically, if you always query the same statement, then you can enter a static one here. And for here, that's exactly the same. Now it only do a trace, but in my case, I map the data to something. But you could map the data here to tags directly if you wanted to. So, just before we close the connection, we have this table data function. The table data function is defined in here to map automatically the data we have received. So what we have inside, so for every element we have inside our array value, we map this accordingly to the columns we have. So remember, when I was selecting tables, my SQL viewer was automatically remapping himself with the correct column. That is the global table model that I will show you how I get this value. But basically, this global table model is accessible to tell me what are my columns. So based on that information, I then map my value of array value in the according columns. Basically, that's what it does. simple line here at line 83. It's just here that I had the manual index column, because the index column, if you remember, does not come from the SQL database. It comes from a manual entry of me. So for each column, I create an index value, and that represents the index of my array of WinCC tags, basically. So that's to map to the SQL Table Viewer. And the second part here is basically here that I have created only 3 columns for now. So I pushed what I have inside my data structure for my SQL Viewer into internal tags. So basically, if we would have a 4th column, we could have column 4, for example, to create a new JavaScript internal array. And then in here, we just add a new line and replace the 3 by 4. And here too, we had another line, which is basically column 4. So basically, this is just a mapping of what we have as a data structure of array of object in JavaScript of our SQL Table Viewer, but we map this to internal tags. So I just do a for loop of the length of that of the column we've built. I took the length of the column 1, but that should always be the same value. I don't see why that could not be the same value, but yeah, that's how I map the value to the internal tags or the WinCC tags. And then here I just say that the SQL table data string property is going to be my output. So the output is created here, and that's basically my data set, my array of object. And I also always do some little traces. So if you run queries in my application and you want to know how does the infeed of the data looks like, well, you have a lot of traces from different steps that are traced. So you have a lot of information available down there. So that was probably the most important button. The other one that is very important, in my opinion, is what happens when the select table changes. So again, when we select different tables, the columns in here adjust automatically. So yeah, I just have one table here. Let me just connect to my other DB. Whoop. Okay. So, for example, table 2, we see now that we have a couple of columns in here. And if I select table 1, then I have just 3 columns. And yeah, it's the same for every table that we can select. So basically what it means is that something happens when this selected table value change it here. So yes, this is happening on the change property of the process value. So in here, so basically I create my index column in here with some sorter and some width. You can adjust that. That's just the default. You can dynamically move the column sizes on the runtime. We have the same connection string as above. And here is an hard-coded query to know what are the columns from the selected table. So value here is the value of the IO field that is returned automatically with the change, with the on-property change. You already have the value available. So the value means what's inside of here, what's inside of the process value at that time. So basically you can use the value inside your script, and that's just a query to your schema sorry, of the selected table, and accordingly to this, then I just create a table model array, and with that table model array, and then I'm then able to push that to the SQL table, and I also push a blank row because I don't know if it's going to work if we don't at least have a single row. So that's why I just create a row based on my object model with all of the entries are empty strings. So that's why in here we have empty white boxes here, because I push some empty value just to have a single empty row. Also, what I've told earlier is when we list the DB, that's the only place that the connection string is a little bit different. Very simple, it's just that we don't have the database argument. So that's the same connection string, but without the database. And the query is also fixed here. So we just list the name of the databases from the master database. So as I told you, we could exclude some databases. So if you don't want to see like the master database, the temp, etc., those four here are all system databases. So you could just uncomment this row here and adjust the excluder, and comment maybe that one here, and just put the one that you don't want to show, and basically when it does not include an entry from the excluder list, then you push that to your table. So basically, if we see that there's a master in the query we've sent, then it won't be added to this because you will be in this if statement. You could do something else from that if statement if you want, but for now I just do nothing in here. So yeah, that's about the application. Maybe just one quick note here, if you want to just see how does that looks like. Well, I can execute a query, or there's not many data here. Let me do that. Top 100. Oh no, master DB, not a good idea. Okay, now it's going to be better. So from the test DB, from the table authors, I want to select top 100 row. So that's going to be a lot of traces coming in, but hopefully I can just maybe do that, and do that, and execute the query. So it goes pretty fast. I mean, it's already done. We already see that we have our 100 entry here. So again, it's 100 times 3, so 300 data. And if I just see the timestamp in here, so 1:30:57 seconds. And if I go to start, so the first trace, 1:30:57 seconds. So it basically took like 10 milliseconds or so to get that, so quite fast. But yeah, you can see as it goes how the data structure, so the array value, how it's getting built on the fly. So you can see that we are always adding the rows or the data of the rows accordingly of what we get, and if I go all the way to the end, where we should have the so that's the column for, so that's the tag, so the columns is the WinCC tag that are going to be mapped. Yeah, but the output is quite an important one, because the output is what is getting mapped to your SQL Table Viewer here. So what you can see is that we start at index 0 for author 1, and we go all the way to index 99 with author name of 100, country of 100. That's exactly what we have here. And yeah, so that's how you can see how your data is being built. And maybe if I just trigger an error, that could, let's say I just do top 100, you're gonna get some diagnostic in here, because we catch the error of our query. So I can see that if I do a bad query, I get a 4200 error, which incorrect syntax near the keyword from. So that's either something bad that I've entered here, or something in my query building here. So my query building is here that I've done wrong. So that could be either cases if you get such an error. Yeah, so make sure you have port 1433 opened from your systems, and that the user you create in your databases has remote access rights also. But that was it for the little demo and the little how to use this tool set for ODBC. Hope you enjoyed, and feel free to leave me some comments or some improvements you would like to see in the future. Thank you, happy unifying. Take care.